Hi, I'm Susan Segal, and my story is a little unusual, and yet everybody uses the phrase, I'd rather be hit by a bus, and I was. I was hit head on by a Los Angeles city bus with my daughter in the car. This day, when this happened, was kind of an unusual day because usually I took my son to school very early in the morning to make his bus, and there wasn't a lot of traffic. But of course, it's Los Angeles, and my husband had a meeting, and so that day he asked if I would take my daughter to school and we could switch around. You know, they say most accidents happen close to home, and this one did. The last thing I remember was getting my daughter and getting in the car, buckling up our seatbelts. And actually a girlfriend called because she was having a party, and we were talking about the party and pulling out of the driveway and heading to school. Really, my daughter remembers the bus heading towards us. I remember turning the wheel at the last minute and basically taking the brunt of the injuries. And honestly, that's the last thing I remember. My story is so interesting because so much is told to me until I'm in the hospital and starting to recover, which is something I've learned as I've told this story many, many times. So we're driving. The bus hit us head on. It was a rainy day, also not good for Los Angeles traffic. And the driver was a brand new driver, and she was in the wrong lane. And so when she skidded directly into me. My daughter leaned over to kiss me goodbye when she first woke up, really, and struggled to get out of the car. And there was a woman standing on the street, and she had a telephone and said, is that your mother? And of course, my daughter, I think, was 11 or 12 at the time. And she said, can I use your phone to call my dad? Which is kind of amazing that she even knew how to do that. I mean, she knew how to use a phone, obviously, but still so much had happened. And the woman lent her her phone, and she called my husband. Then he came up to what was really a horrific scene. Both doors were off the car. They had to take the top of the car off and use the jaws of life to even begin to get me out. The front of the car was completely under the bus, and I was unconscious. So an ambulance came, and my husband had to make what we call the Sophie's Choice decision, where my daughter really wanted her to go with him and get in the ambulance, but I still was in the car, and the police and firemen were pulling me out. So my husband made the choice to go with my daughter, and I was followed behind in the ambulance. We went to Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, and that was super lucky in retrospect because they had a brand new team of trauma surgeons on that day, and they were trying them out. Meanwhile, I was taken into emergency. My leg was hanging off the table. I was bleeding profusely everywhere, and they brought my daughter and I into the emergency room. My husband was standing there, and I was screaming, help me, I'm dying, which was terrible for my 12-year-old daughter to hear. They were cutting the clothes off me. And at first they said to my husband, she's not going to make it. I'd severed the artery in my leg. And they said, you have to prepare. And this was all in the emergency room with my daughter there, so you can imagine how terrifying. And then they came out and said, we think we've solved that, but she's broken her neck and it looks pretty bad. And so again, you have to prepare. So at this point, they called to get my son out of school, which I always thought was the most sort of terrifying thing, because imagine being a freshman in high school and being called to out of school, and then they tell you have to go see your mother who's dying in the hospital. And a friend of mine went to pick him up and actually got him into the ICU, which is not a normal thing for a young person, because she started saying he has to say goodbye to his mother, which also freaked out everyone. They stabilized my neck, and however they did that, and thought, okay. And then I had a traumatic brain injury. In all, I had broken 33 bones. I had cracked my skull, had a traumatic neck injury, both arms, 12 ribs, if you can imagine. My hip and pelvis was crushed, both legs, my femur, both knees, my tibias, my Achilles heel was ripped off. All of my toes were broken. My daughter was lucky enough not to be injured, which was kind of amazing, and friends brought her home. and took care of her. And she was really kind of incredible, brave. And again, because uninjured, she was able to recover a lot quickly. And my son too, they were pretty shook up. My husband, of course, stayed in the hospital with me. I had a trach, and then I was intubated, and there was a lot that comes with something like that too, because they were worried about sepsis. There's all kinds of ways you can get sick in the hospital just from having that in. So then they took that out and put a feeding tube in me and all kinds of different things to try to sustain life, really. In that timing, I had survived, but they were worried that I was going to either stroke out or whatever was going to happen with all of these broken bones. And you know what? I don't even think they knew at the time that how many bones I had broken, because they were in emergency triage, basically trying to save my life. They had me strapped down to a hospital bed for almost 3 months, 3 complete months. And some of it I really credit with how I healed, because, you know, when you've broken something and you're dragging your sorry self around on a crutch, it's much harder to heal. But because I was so laid out and strapped down, I got a different kind of chance to heal. Meanwhile, they haloed my head. I still have the scars where they actually drill an entire 2-inch nail into your head to stabilize your neck. And then they put a giant heavy plastic bib on you to keep you from moving. So now I'm in bed. I really look like one of those people in a movie that's laid out, completely tied down. And through the tying down, I started to have these crazy hallucinations. I thought people were kidnapping me. I thought I was taken prisoner. I thought I was on a submarine. Really insane. And I would wake up and tell my husband, who I wasn't even conscious of at the time. I really wasn't conscious till probably about 2.5 months in. I had occasional moments, but most of the time I woke up and told my husband these crazy stories. And I wasn't on a lot of drugs, which was also kind of amazing. I had some probably to help me sleep. It's incredible how the body works to protect itself. And maybe because I had such a bad brain and cracked skull that I didn't need them. I just went into almost like wasn't a coma, but it was almost an induced coma where I really wasn't aware. And then slowly awareness came. My husband was told by the doctors to come into my hospital room every day and tell me that I was in a terrible accident and that my children were okay and that I was going to get better. And every single day for 3 months, he had to say that till I woke up. Thank God they were okay. And then I began to start the healing. But through that, I couldn't eat, or even the intravenous was tough because I had so much casting and wrapping. So they fed me through a feeding tube, which I hated, and used to pull out. I don't know how I did it. I used to pull it out in the hospital. I mean, honestly, it was all a miserable process. But my story really begins after the accident, which is how I learned to walk again and get better and survive what was so horrific. My daughter, who miraculously was alive, kissed me goodbye and struggled to get out of the car. There was a woman standing right there who said, "Is that your mother?" And she said yes and started to cry, of course, and said, "Can I call my dad?" Of course she did, and helped her. And then my husband, who was in a meeting with Disney, which sounds ridiculous now, of course came rushing to the scene. And at that point, when I started to recover, he started to tell me what happened, which, by the way, was so fascinating to me, because when you wake up in the hospital 3 months later and you're suddenly hearing the stories of what happened, it's crazy. So my husband got the call and he came to the accident scene, and he had to make a choice of whether to go, because of course they wanted to take my daughter in the ambulance, and they were still cutting me out of the car because that was an intense process, apparently. So he made the choice to go with my daughter, which I do believe was the right choice. When he got to the emergency room with my daughter, they came in with me, and I was screaming, "I'm dying." And my leg was hanging off and I was bleeding, and he was trying to protect my daughter, who they were examining. And he was telling her that it's going to be okay and so forth and so on. Your mom's going to be okay. When they came into the next room, they have those pull the curtain sort of aside in the emergency room, and said to both of them, you need to prepare yourself. An artery is cut and we want you both to know it, so prepare yourself. Then my daughter, he tells me, freaked out and couldn't stand it anymore, and they let her go from the emergency room, and he brought her outside to some friends when a doctor came out and told him that I had also broken my neck and that he should also prepare for the worst. It's so crazy when you think you're hearing that right in a row 2 times. But at that point, everyone tells me I was completely unconscious. I was not a real coma, but whatever kind of coma. My brain shut off because I was so injured that that's what happened. So then friends took my kids home, my husband says, and my husband stayed by my side. I don't know, but I know my husband's a really capable man. However, when you're dealing with your wife and children, I know that he was emotionally rocked. His whole being was rocked. And some of my friends said, wow, I've never seen your husband so upset, so shook. The other thing, it's interesting, that I think really shook him up was the fact that he had to call my mother and tell her that her daughter was hit by a bus and may not make it. And I think having to put it out there was also really intense. The accident was so huge that it was on CNN and other news stations, and those started playing on the hospital television. And I think that really shook my husband up. But he's a pretty stalwart guy and knew what he had to do, which was take care of the children and hopefully talk to the doctors. It's such an interesting moment because I kind of still remember it. I remember seeing a bus and I remember turning the wheel, because don't forget, my daughter was in the front seat. So I remember turning the wheel, and that's it. That is the last thing I remember for 3 months. And thank God I had a big old BMW. It was really old, but it was a tank. So that is probably a piece that saved my life. Well, I didn't know where I was when I first woke up in the hospital. I had no idea what was happening. And that's when my husband would come over and say to me, you've been in a terrible accident. You've been hit by a bus, which sounds so silly to say now, and you're gonna heal and be okay. So that's what I remember him saying when I first woke up, but I still didn't really understand anything. I really wanted to go home, and I wanted to get back to what in my mind was regular life, which of course I really wasn't going to be able to do that. So I used to ask anybody who came in the room to get me a drink, to get me a Diet Coke. And of course, none of them could. But my husband was really quite amazing. He was there every day and most evenings, helping me to heal till I finally started to come out of it. So the recovery was quite complicated and long. I had to have 2 operations to fix my neck, which, by the way, is a miracle because they have told me that it was millimeters to have been completely paralyzed, which they were still worried about even after they did that. So I had broken 33 bones, 12 ribs, both arms, both legs, all my toes, tibias, knees, crushed pelvis, all of that had to come out, sort of, except some of the stuff with my arms was still bandaged and my Achilles was still bandaged long into the 2.5 month recovery. And it was until that point when I really started to come alive. They said, okay, now we can start to teach you how to walk again, really, how to sit up in bed and how to start to live again. I'm very lucky to have had a positive attitude, and I know not a lot of people have that, but that was something that kept me going. And I can be funny, maybe not now, but I think I drew a lot of nurses and doctors to my side with humor, and they really started to help me. When the recovery began, it probably took a full month to learn to even sit up in bed. And even that was a process. And then they had to teach me how to put my legs over the bed, which was a process as well. And I was so frightened to move at all because I'd been so hurt and so strapped down that even moving a hand or a leg was a huge accomplishment. So when I first sat up, they all cheered, and that was pretty exciting. And when I first got my legs over the bed, they all cheered, and that was exciting. Then they brought in these crazy machines to lift me and hoist me and get me up and stand. And I have to say, oh gosh, I remember when I was standing in this contraption, and they were very happy because I could put some weight on my legs. And they had to leave the room for a minute, whatever they were all doing. And there was a mirror there. And I remember looking at myself completely covered in a halo and casts and things to make me stand. And I remember thinking, who is that person? What is this? How am I ever going to get better? I mean, it was so devastating to be that hurt. And then to see myself. I hadn't seen myself in the 2.5, 3 months. So that was pretty intense. And I actually remember that moment. And I don't remember too many of them till I started in the full recovery. And that was when my husband said, in order to stay in the hospital, you need to meet certain requirements every day to go into the rehab here. And he went out and looked at other rehabs, which is where they always want to put you, in those weird rehab homes. And he came back and said, you won't like them. They're horrible. There's a bunch of people laying in rooms. You don't get a lot of attention. You have to stay in the hospital. You have to meet the requirements that they want you to meet here. I was frightened. And so when they said, you have to sit up, or you have to move your arm or turn your hand, I was really trying. And so I was super lucky. I got into the rehab in the hospital. And from that point on, it was exhausting. The work you have to do to learn to walk again, to learn to even get into a wheelchair. You hoist yourself up and you swing your legs around. And I mean, it's an effort. And I was exhausted because I'd been in bed for 3 months. As the time wore on, I started to get more used to the different things I had to do. And I had terrific PT people, terrific physical therapists. And again, I used humor a lot to get through it. This many years later, it's 10 years later, I used to dream about where would I be 10 years from now? And, I'm going to have my challenges every day, but it's kind of amazing that I'm here and that I walk as well as I do. I still have things. I can't turn my arm because I practiced so much to turn this hand. This hand froze. And it took a bunch of operations to get me to be able to stand up straight. And that was pretty exhausting, honestly. I think I had 4 hip and pelvis operations before I was actually able to stand up and really walk. But today, it's a miracle I'm here. People stop me and say it's a miracle you're here. There are days that every bone hurts, every joint aches, but I'm also getting older. And I like to say that the check engine light has gone on and stayed on because it's kind of crazy. But I'm pretty good. All things considered, I had a great group of doctors, a lot of love, community. I had major community that helped me get through that. And my kids and family were okay. And that is really why I'm here. What I would tell you is this has been a lemonade from lemons kind of situation, that I never expected to be hit by a bus and then have so much attention paid to it. The recovery became a part of that as well, that I could do it. I could find a way to be healthy. And then I could share my story. And that's been so incredible. When we share our story, people stand up from all over the world and say things like, my bus is, I got divorced, or my bus is, I was hurt by this. I've had people throw away their canes and come up to me and say, it's nothing like what happened to you, but I was able to recover and do this. And I have found that has made it such a sweet thing in life. And then my husband wrote a book about me and our love story and the accident. And from there, that has opened 1 million doors for us. We've been on 1 million television shows. So lucky to be doing your podcast and talking about how to survive. So much of survival is love and your own ability to be positive and to make it through something like this. And I know that's not easy for everyone, but I do think you can choose being positive and trying to make it through. I just wanted to get back to my regular life. I wasn't unhappy. I just wanted to be able to live again. I will tell you that love is the answer. And if you're lucky to have some love in your life, it's one of the things that for sure brought me through this entire ordeal. But I will also say that positive attitude and humor, I used so much humor to get me through and was able to laugh at myself and make choices. I said yes. I think making choices to say, yes, I want to recover and I want to live and I want to be with my family is a small part. You can say vanilla or chocolate. You choose yes or no. Do you want to recover and feel better and start walking? Yes. But a lot of people say no. And I would say make the choice. Yes or no, make a choice. And if you can do it with love and humor, how lucky are you in the world? My husband wrote a book. It's called Struck, a husband's memoir of trauma and triumph. And some of that helped me get through all of this, that I had the care. But really it's a choice. It's a mental choice to say, yes, I'm going to survive. I will tell you that everybody's got their bus. We've all been hit by something. And to be able to share this story has really been a miracle and a gift in my life.